12:30 in the morning. You have to be up early tomorrow. And yet, here you are, staring at the screen, buried in a tutorial that has absolutely nothing to do with your job. Nobody made you do this. Nobody's paying you for it. It just happened again. That mental click that convinces you this new skill right now is the one you have to learn. Last week, it was building with AI. Last month, photography. Before that, design. Before that, trading. And somewhere along the way, you ended up with a long line of projects you started with excitement and never finished. And here comes the question you already know by heart. What am I doing? Why can't I just focus on one thing? Why does everyone around me seem to have their lane figured out except me? What am I doing wrong? It stings even more when you try to sum yourself up in one sentence and can't. Your friend says, "I'm a lawyer," and that's it, subject closed. Your other friend says, "I'm a designer," and nobody asks anything else. But when someone hits you with the classic, "So what do you do?" your mind goes completely blank. What are you even supposed to say to that? Why is it that you, of all people, don't have an answer ready? Today we're breaking down the psychology behind people with multiple interests. What actually makes them this way? And the concrete steps they need to take to end up with a level of focus better than 90% of everyone else. Let's get into it. This pattern has an actual name, and it's not a flaw with a cute nickname. It's a profile psychology has been documenting for decades. They call it polymathy, a serious commitment to several fields over the course of a lifetime. We're not talking about collecting hobbies out of boredom. We're talking about sustaining a real interest in more than one area for years, even if you've never called it that. And the strongest evidence for it comes from an unexpected place: the biographies of Nobel laureates. Robert and Michelle Root-Bernstein spent years going through interviews, letters, and autobiographies of laureates in science, literature, and economics, comparing them to colleagues who also had solid careers but never reached that same level. What they found should have been headline news everywhere. The laureates were far more likely to maintain serious interests outside their specialty. They painted, played instruments, wrote, built things with their hands, got into fields that on the surface had nothing to do with what made them famous. And they said it themselves, without anyone having to ask twice. It wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. That other interest directly fueled their best ideas. The people who reached the absolute ceiling of human achievement weren't the narrowest. They were the broadest. And that contradicts pretty much everything you were probably told in school. Pick one thing, get good at it, don't get distracted. The minds that changed the course of science did the exact opposite, and not by accident. They understood something nobody explained to you in time. Why does this actually work? Why would learning photography make you better at running a business? Or why would studying music make someone a better scientist? There's a mechanism with a technical name for this: transfer. Your brain doesn't file what you learn into sealed compartments. Every new field doesn't just leave you with facts. It leaves you with ways of thinking, structures, ways of looking at a problem that resurface exactly when you least expect them, sometimes years later, in a context that seems to have nothing to do with where you first picked them up. And that's the first sign that describes you. You're the kind of person who grabs an idea from a completely different world and drops it exactly where nobody expected it to fit. You say something in a meeting like, "This reminds me of a pattern I saw in biology," and the room goes quiet for a second, until it turns out it actually works. In psychology, this is called far transfer, and the pure specialist can't make that move, not for lack of talent, but because they've never left the one territory they know. You spent years crossing in and out of different worlds without keeping count, and each one left you with a map nobody else in that room has. Think about how many times you solved something at your current job using logic you picked up somewhere completely unrelated. A narrative structure from a show you watched, a design principle you applied to a spreadsheet, a gut feel for probability left over from that trading course you never finished. None of that was wasted time. It was inventory, even if you didn't realize it at the time. Meanwhile, something very different happens inside the mind of the pure specialist. A researcher named Erik Dane gave it a name: cognitive entrenchment. The deeper someone goes into a single field, the more solid their mental map becomes. That solidity makes them fast, sure, but it also makes them rigid. They stop questioning the map. They start rejecting anything that doesn't fit it. Without noticing, their expertise turns into a cage built out of their own achievements. It's like planting a single crop, efficient, right up until a disease shows up that the crop can't handle, and the whole field is wiped out in one season. A forest is messier, harder to sum up in a sentence, but it survives almost anything because nothing can wipe out that much variety at once. The specialist is the monoculture. You're the forest, even if you've spent years apologizing for not being a neat row of corn. Here's the second sign. If you notice that when a field changes completely, you adapt faster than people who'd spent 20 years inside it, that's not luck. You already know what it feels like to start from zero, because you've done it 15 times. You know the discomfort of those first clumsy weeks, and you know it passes. Dane's own research points to exactly this. Exposing yourself to tasks outside your main domain is one of the ways to keep that entrenchment from setting in the first place. What you call restlessness is, underneath it all, constant training in adaptability. And today, that's the single most valuable skill in a world that refuses to sit still. Think about how many jobs that existed 10 years ago don't exist anymore, and how many that exist today didn't back then. The specialist who built their entire identity around a single map loses their footing the moment that map stops working. And it's not just a practical problem. It's a full identity crisis, because for years, that person was their profession, and nothing else. You've already lost your footing 15 times before, and 15 times you found new ground. That's not weakness. That's a muscle nobody ever taught you to name. You might also wonder why your path feels so slow compared to people who picked their lane at 22. Here's something that should take some weight off your shoulders. In 2022, a massive analysis of more than 6,000 athletes, including a good number of the best in the world in their sports, flipped decades of advice on early specialization on its head. Elite athletes, for the most part, weren't the kids who focused on one sport from an early age. They were the ones who tried several, started their main sport later, and, at the beginning, progressed more slowly than kids who specialized early and then stalled out at a mid-level. The same pattern shows up in science. Nobel laureates had broader training and slower early progress than colleagues who ended up with smaller recognitions. That slow start isn't a flaw on your part. It's quite literally the signature of people playing the long game. The ones who take off fast and stall out early aren't the benchmark you should be chasing, even if in your 20s it feels that way every time you see someone your age already established online. That comparison hurts, but it's measuring the wrong kind of speed. And here's a sign you probably know all too well.
You measure yourself against the specialist in every one of your worlds, and you always come up short. The full-time photographer beats you on technique. The full-time developer beats you on speed. The trader who's spent 8 years doing nothing else beats you at reading a chart. And you stack those comparisons one on top of the other until you quietly conclude you're mediocre at everything. What you're missing is that nobody is measuring the one place where you actually win. The combination of all of it in a single person. That scoreboard simply doesn't exist anywhere yet. So nobody's telling you that you're already winning it. It's a bit like competing in a tournament where you're scored discipline by discipline, and you always land in 20th place without anyone noticing you're the only person entered in all 5 at once. Your level was never the problem. The scoreboard was. One that was never built to measure someone like you in the first place. Now, let's be honest, because not everyone with 1,000 interests is standing where you are. There's a fake version of this, and it's worth knowing whether it describes you, because confusing one for the other is exactly what gets people to hand you the wrong advice. Just focus on one thing, and get you to actually believe it. If you start everything and finish nothing, if you buy the gear, watch the first few videos, read the first few chapters, and vanish the moment the novelty wears off and the actual work begins, that's not having multiple interests. That's consuming content dressed up as curiosity. And no new project is going to fix it, because the problem was never the number of interests. It's that none of them ever turned into something real. Nobel laureates weren't tourists in their side fields. They exhibited, published, performed in public, built things that existed outside their own heads. You don't need to be a master at everything, but you do need, at least once per interest, something you can actually point to. It's worth taking a moment to honestly check which side of that line you're on for every project you currently have open. Not to punish yourself, but to know exactly where to start fixing things. If you saw yourself in a couple of these signs, here are the concrete steps to stop scattering and start actually stacking an advantage, without shutting off the curiosity you've never managed to shut off anyway, no matter how many lists and New Year's resolutions you've thrown at it. Step 1. Finish something in every field you enter. This isn't about mastering it. It's about leaving proof that it existed. A published project, something you can point to and say, I made this. You don't need a professional portfolio in every area. You need to cross the line between, I watched some videos about this, and I made something with this. A line that's lower than you think, and also the one most people with scattered interests never cross, because the real work always shows up right after the fun part ends. Step 2. Connect your worlds on purpose. Because the advantage isn't having many interests, it's getting them to talk to each other. When you learn something in one area, ask yourself directly where else it applies. Asking that seriously and consistently is what separates someone who collects interests from someone who builds something out of them. Skip that step, and you're left with a list of separate skills competing for your free time. Do it, and you've got a system that feeds itself, where every new thing you learn strengthens what came before it instead of competing with it. Step 3. Go deep in seasons. Don't cram 5 projects into the same week. That's how they all die together. Give each interest a stretch of time
where it becomes your priority while the rest sit in the background. Then rotate. That's how the people who went far actually moved. Depth in one focused stretch, breadth spread across time. Never both at once. Breadth doesn't compete with depth. It organizes it. Once you start moving this way, something actually shifts. You stop being that mess of open tabs and unfinished projects from the beginning of this video, and you start looking more like a whole ecosystem. Harder to sum up in a sentence, sure, but also much harder to take down than any single crop specialist. A crop dies from one disease. An ecosystem absorbs the hit and keeps running somewhere else. The next time someone asks what you do and your mind goes blank, don't treat it as a flaw to fix. It's proof that you don't fit in one box, and you probably never should have. For years, you let that uncomfortable silence convince you something was wrong with you, when really, all that was missing was the right language to name what you already were. Tell me in the comments which of these signs hit closest to home. Importing ideas from other worlds, adapting faster than anyone when everything changes, or measuring yourself against the specialist and always coming up short. You're definitely not the only one down here with 15 open tabs and no title that sums it all up. If this video shifted something for you, hit like and send it to that one person who's still apologizing for having too many interests. And subscribe so we can keep taking apart why the mind doesn't work the way we were told. See you in the next one.